Hello, and welcome back to Bearing Birth, a birth story podcast highlighting the emotional impact of birth, the immediate postpartum period, and the years beyond. I'm Jordan, a doula specializing in postpartum support.
And I'm Sophie, a perinatal mental health therapist. In today's episode, Jordan takes the seat as host and interviews me as I share the birth story of my daughter Ruby, who is almost 2 next month. We had this conversation way back in February of this year, and I'm finally ready to put it out there.
I'm so excited for this episode. I've been excited to listen back to it, and it was actually really nice after all this time. In the first episode, you talk about your experiences being pregnant, how your birth plan shifted drastically, and we also touch on how training to be a doula impacted your birth in ways you didn't expect. Mm-hmm. I really loved listening back to it. I feel like there was all of this pressure that you brought into telling your birth story on the podcast. And I think it was sort of like this looming thing until it happened. And I think when we had the conversation, it was so natural. And I think you did a really good job of just like expressing what you wanted and needed to express. I was just so in it there with you that listening back was like a whole new perspective, and hearing your story in that way, I think was even different from when I was sitting with you when you told it. So I really liked that. Richards, are you going to keep sneezing?
Yeah, I put a lot of pressure on myself, I think, because there's so many feelings, of course, and thoughts about the birth story experience that I wanted to make sure I captured them all for this podcast format. I didn't want to forget any details. And then, of course, there are so many things that I didn't mention. But editing back, I was really surprised at how much I did cover.
Yeah.
And we talked about that, how detailed things were. And I'm really glad that you gave me the space to do that, because even now, 11 months later, some of those things aren't as important to me anymore, or I wouldn't remember them like I did when they happened and then when I was recalling them. So I'm, and like each time I do think back to the birth story or tell it to a different person, a different version really does come out.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we tell everyone like whatever's important to you is important. And I feel like
it's true.
that was you worrying about, oh, these details aren't important, but like you wanted to talk about them. So that makes them important.
Yeah. To the version of myself way back in February, it was really important. Yeah.
But I think that's good. I think you put it, it's like almost like journaling. You like put it outside of you.
Yeah.
What was it like listening back almost a year later?
Yeah, I was really nervous. And that's probably why I delayed so much, is because I didn't want to sit and edit my own voice. It's just, it's not cringy necessarily. Well, yeah, it is. It's like, oh, I'm speaking so vulnerably, and I'm having to listen to myself for over 2 hours. But it wasn't as bad. And I think the distance and the time from sitting down and doing it gave me so much more compassion for myself. And I was actually really curious and excited to sit down instead of editing it maybe a week or two after we had recorded. It was just way too fresh.
Yeah.
I mean, it was its own therapeutic experience sitting down and telling it in this way, knowing that people would listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it different than, you talked about how every time you tell your story, it's a little bit different. When you listen back, was it different than you thought it would be?
No, I think if I remember back to how I thought about the birth at that time, I'm like, oh yeah, that's where I was in the development of thinking about my birth and my journey. And I was really surprised. Well, there's just such a strong bias towards being anti-hospital that was apparent in everything that I was saying and so much of my beliefs. And I really don't feel that way anymore. And I think that comes from having 2 years pretty much after the birth it also has to, what does it have to do?
You integrated your experience into not only your life, but your belief system.
Yeah. I really believe, after hearing so many people come on the podcast and other people outside of the podcast who share their birth stories, I believe that you can have an incredible birth experience that's positive in a hospital setting. And I believe that you can have the same experience wherever you are. It's not dependent on the location, but who is there and what your own beliefs are about it.
Yeah, I mean, celebrating the good in all types of birth. All types of birth have downsides, negative things, and all types of birth have positive, if we didn't have hospital births.
Yeah.
a lot of people wouldn't have their lives saved.
Yeah. And I feel like that's important to mention too, that I'm incredibly grateful for the hospital, for the condition that I had, preeclampsia. Like, who knows what could have happened had that not been available to me. If I was a human however many 100 years ago, would I be alive? Would my baby be alive? Yeah, there's a lot of feelings. There's like a little bit of guilt too that came up at the time when I was recording, and then also listening back, of feeling some guilt of, my baby was healthy. I turned out okay at the end. That is not the experience or story that other people deal with sometimes. And just how much I complained about how things didn't go my way. I think it was really part of my journey into becoming a mother and a parent. And there's so much of giving up your own self for this other being. I think I don't know how to really describe it. It's like learning how to not be selfish anymore. I'm not trying to diminish who I was at the time or my emotions or to invalidate the experience, but I turned out okay. She's okay. We survived. I didn't know that at the time, but I have so much more perspective now and a lot more acceptance. And yeah, I had a life-threatening condition that I was going through.
Yeah, I think I feel two ways about this. One, we tell other people, like, you can't compare something that traumatized you to like other people having it worse, because trauma affects people in so many different ways. You can't possibly compare that. And
can't put it on a hierarchy.
Just because you turned out okay, we tell people this all the time. Like, if you turn out okay, your baby's safe. Like, that doesn't mean that your experience wasn't traumatizing. And that's valid. But also, I think that it's interesting to look at it through the lens of like how much you've grown, and how that was like really a kickoff of you getting used to like having to let go of that control.
Yeah.
It's like you were really forced into like letting go of your old self in a way that was very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And that got you to where you are, but it was also very unpleasant.
Yeah. I do believe that the universe gave me this event and this opportunity to learn that lesson through this experience. The ultimate lesson of letting go and changing course and having to be okay with that and not being able to have things go my way. And it sucks that has to be attached to somebody else's life, my child, but if it wasn't, it wouldn't have been such an important lesson to learn.
Well, it was the first time your choices were attached to someone else's life in that way. So of course it's going to be loaded with so much stuff and like so much opportunity for distress.
Yeah.
Are you glad that you told your birth story in this way, like in this format? Are you happy to have that?
I'm so happy to have that. Yeah. And in editing, I kept so much of the conversation. I mostly just cut out pauses and filler words like ums and things like that. And I really wanted to keep as much of the raw conversation as possible for my future self.
That's great.
Yeah.
You continued to be vulnerable even in the editing.
Yeah. It is really vulnerable to put this out there, but
yeah,
I feel good about it.
Good.
Yeah.
Come a long way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that this process is helpful in thinking about how you might go into a second birth differently?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, even outside of the podcast, going into the second pregnancy, hopefully in the second birth, I feel a lot more like, let's just see what happens. Let's ride the wave of this next experience, because I'm going to learn something from it. And I have this gratitude. And it's like what I think Courtney said, this birth is a mystery. And I'm opening myself up to that. I'm like curious what this next birth will teach me, even if it's very difficult in whatever way it will be, because it will be. But it's something new that I have to walk through. A lot of people describe birth as a portal, and I do feel that way. Yeah, you walk through this door and you come out the other end a different person.
Remembering back to the part in the episode where you talk about how once you were done working, but you weren't in labor yet, you were still avoiding sitting with your feelings about your fears, I guess, going into birth, doing things to distract you from going there. And it sounds like being more open the second time around.
Yeah.
You are in a better place to feel the feelings, maybe feel the fear, and just ride with it a little bit more.
Well, I've had, I think, also good practice with this birth experience to sit in a lot of pain from it and grief, and also just parenting in general. That's learning how to regulate and sit in things that are uncomfortable on a daily basis. And so
Literally
I
every
just feel, I feel like I'm in a much better place to take something on like pregnancy. I've also heard that you just don't have the time to think about and plan anymore.
That's true. It's very different when you have a child.
Yeah.
I remember someone on the podcast saying like they were really bummed at how resilient they had to be. And I feel like that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Because it's like, yeah, I'm so resilient now, but that also sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. And boy, do I wish I could, knowing what I know now, could I have that first pregnancy experience where you get to sit around for hours and rest, because
It'll never be that way.
No.
Just got to lean on your people.
Yeah, I've learned throughout this birth experience how important leaning on other people is.
Yeah, it's everything.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that stood out to you when you were listening back?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that stood out to me as I was editing was that I noticed, and when I speak about myself, I use the word you a lot. Like, oh, when you feel scared or afraid, instead of, and when I felt scared or afraid. And I think that comes from being a therapist and using myself in the room and the other person, or just like the colloquial you, to describe things to maybe help people feel more comfortable. But I noticed it sort of detaches me from uncomfortable feelings, and maybe that's like my own process of not sitting in it.
I think that's common. I think it's not just therapists.
Okay.
Because I definitely have done it, and I feel like I've had to practice not doing that, and I've heard of other people in the same boat. So
yeah,
you're not alone in that, I think.
Yeah.
But it's cool that you notice it. I mean,
it was so obvious. Yeah. And I want to be more intentional about speaking about myself using person first language, or me.
It takes practice.
Yeah.
Everything with bettering ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Any reflections from you as a host, and then listening back to you as a host?
Yeah, I think it felt like I was talking a lot more, and I wasn't sure if that was because we know each other so well and it was more of a back and forth. But then I also think it was because I was just one host and there wasn't two of us. I think if I compared, well, I guess this was a long time ago. I hope that I'm like as comfortable in like talking to our guests as I am with sitting and talking with you, because it felt very comfortable to listen to your episode.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if I was like, am I acting differently because I was talking to a close friend than I am with our guests, because I want to like bring that same thing to our guests too. So that sort of had me thinking about that a little bit.
I think I can't recall earlier episodes, but I've noticed in the last few months or the last couple of interviews, you share a lot more about yourself and your own process. And I really appreciate that. Yeah. And then it allows me to open up too more.
Yeah.
I think it's our own journey in becoming hosts and allowing ourselves to be a part of this instead of being these interviewers.
Yeah. I think that's what made it easy to get started, is like, oh, this isn't about us.
Yeah.
It's about other people. But I think that it also is about us.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't like avoid that. If our conversations with people are what we say they are, which are just a real conversation where we're sitting down with people, not saying, this is all about the podcast, then of course it's about us too, because we're in the conversation with these people.
And if you think about podcasts that you listen to and really enjoy, I bet those ones, the hosts are sharing about themselves and being really candid. Right.
It makes you like them and want to keep listening.
Yeah.
Because you're connecting with them.
So I think another intention is maybe with this next, maybe we can talk more about that in the next intro that we're going to do for the celebrating 1 year of the podcast, having an intention to bring more of myself. Maybe you
Yeah,
too.
I think I totally agree. We've come so far.
Yeah, I know. Let's save that excitement for the next one.
Well, the content warnings for your episode include high blood pressure, preeclampsia, unintended hospital stay, transfer of care, pup rash, and emergency C-section.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm really looking forward to listening back in however many years. Yeah, I'm really grateful.
Also, stay tuned for part 2 coming out on November 20th. Enjoy!
A doula and a therapist are sitting down to talk about birth. A doula and a therapist are sitting talk about birth. Hello.
Hi.
I'm here to tell my birth story.
It's just the two of us today.
Yeah, it feels good and strange to be on the other side of the table, but
Yeah,
I'm
literally.
ready. Yeah, I'm here. I'm definitely nervous, but I'm also really ready to. It's been over a year now since it happened, and I'm ready to go through it again in a much better place than when it happened and in the weeks and months following the birth, as you know. Yeah, I just have a lot of empathy for and gratitude for those who have come on, because it is nerve-wracking going through this again. And it's easier to be on the other side, to be the host.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not quite as much vulnerability on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
Even though we're like putting out a podcast, which is pretty vulnerable, but like, yeah, the stories are really getting deep into some serious stuff.
Yeah. How do you feel about being we're usually co-hosting together. How do you feel about being a host?
I feel excited. I feel like I'm just noticing now that when there's only two people, you're constantly making eye contact.
Yeah.
And when someone's talking to both of us, they're going back and forth. So it's not but I think that's cool. I think it's interesting. And even though I was like around the time of your birth a little bit, like there's so much that I know I don't know about your birth story, especially like the inner stuff that you were going through and after. And you know, we just wanted to sort of provide a little bit of support during that time, but that's like 1% of what was going on. So I'm really excited to hear the whole story, the good and the bad, and the maybe just the good and the bad. I don't know.
All of it.
Yeah,
I'm curious. My questions as a host often reference my own struggling with perfectionism. And as I was thinking about coming on and doing this, I wanted to be very in control about it. And I had to refrain from doing that, like running through how I would tell the story at night.
Oh my God, like writing yourself a mental script.
Yeah, and I just really want to give myself the opportunity not to do that. I did write down part of the birth story a few days after it happened, and I have those notes in front of me. And then I made a few notes of like really important things that I want to be able to share, mostly for myself to look back on and maybe for my daughter to look back on. I also want to dedicate this to her in a way, and my family. Like, I look forward to listening to this in however many years to come.
Yeah, that's so special. I mean, I'm aware of like what we're offering our guests, all of those things that you just said, but it's sort of like when it's so close to home, when I know you so well and I know Ruby, it's like, wow, that is actually so cool.
Yeah. So hi, future Ruby. You're probably an amazing person.
She already is.
Yeah. So I just, want to be very open with this and, run through the story from start to finish and just see what comes up, and maybe some new things will come up, and a few weeks ago, we had Libby on, which by the time this will have aired, my episode, Libby's birth story, and her episode on her work as a birth story listener, and will have already aired. And so I reached out to Libby after we had her on and scheduled a session with her. And so that was about 2 weeks ago from today. And that really helped me. A lot of what I'm going to share today, I think, was informed by my session with her.
That's so cool. I feel like it's nice that the timing worked out where I think originally we were planning to schedule this
before.
Before.
And then the ice storm hit and holiday stuff. And
now I'm excited to hear about how that went too, because it's so cool that like you spent 90 minutes with her, right? And now you have like this whole new perspective on telling your birth story. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Not so much in telling it, but what the narratives, like why there's such strong narratives that I'm holding on to from the birth. They're connected to deeper things that I've struggled with my whole life, which I'll get into. But
which makes sense. I feel like everything is impacted by that, and birth is so huge.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you feel ready? How do you feel?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
I feel a little more relaxed now that we have a candle on, we have some tea.
The lights are dim,
I have
warm
a big
tea.
blanket. Yeah.
Maybe we should think about that for all our guests. Like, how can we make it a Zen environment?
Yeah. Libby actually sent me a DM on Instagram, which on the Bearing Birth podcast, which maybe you saw too. It was on aesthetic perfectionism.
Oh, yeah. I briefly looked through that. I feel like I have that too.
Yeah, where you really need your environment to look and feel a certain way in order to feel regulated and calm inside. And this is the vibe that I need.
We made it
to go into this.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I mean, yeah, I feel like I can't relax if things are not how I want. So
yeah,
I understand. Okay, well, let's get into it. Yeah. So do you want to start with how your pregnancy was?
Pregnancy was, in the beginning, we didn't necessarily plan for this to happen, but we were also ready, and we had conversations around being ready to start a family. And I feel really happy with the timing, because I don't think I would have been ready before when this happened. And pregnancy was, I felt a little sick in the beginning and pretty tired in the first trimester, but I was overall really excited and intrigued by this whole new physical experience. And I remember getting a pregnancy diary book to journal how things were going, and I think that was the start of my control around it, where you get the little pregnancy journal, you start researching the birthing centers and getting everything in order and trying to consume all of the information you can to prepare. And it was still a ways away, the birth, ideally 9 months away. But even from the very beginning, I remember, starting to look for things for the baby and just, gathering, nesting.
Trying to have control over what you can in a situation that you have to let go of so much control about certain things.
Yeah. And I finally finished that doula training that you had taken, and I had delayed doing because I was in school and I just couldn't do both of them at the same time. And so I did that again just to get some childbirth education under my belt.
It's a cool way to learn about so much related to birth. I mean, you can get that with an actual childbirth education course for people who are pregnant, but
it was too
cool
much
to see the flip side. Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I learned too much, which also didn't help me, I think, because
with needing that control.
Yeah. I learned about childbirth from the perspective of being the person helping someone else instead of the person being in the situation. And so I created, I think, these conditions for experiencing trauma, which I go into later. But I knew too much ultimately.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I get that though.
Yeah, and then being a perinatal therapist too, you know a lot about trauma and perinatal mental health issues and concerns and what can lead to this situation. And I just knew too much in the end. Okay, I'm delaying. I can feel it. I'm going off course. So pregnancy was great in the second trimester. Super high energy. We went hiking a lot and walking, try to go walking every day. And I just felt really good in my body. It's the first time where as a woman, you can just have a bigger belly and it's empowering instead of shaming, which is on our fat phobic culture. But I just felt really beautiful in my body. And also remember taking extra time massaging my belly and putting shea butter on and just really connecting with Ruby. I didn't know that it was Ruby at the time. We didn't wait to find out the sex until the birth. But I just remember feeling really mesmerized by, I can feel her kicking. And I really enjoyed that part.
Yeah. I like that. I remember you saying that you felt at the time you've never felt less self-conscious about your body, I think is what you said. And it's cool. You can connect with your body in a totally different way. And it's not just you, which is wild. What was that like having a life inside you? That's one perspective of this podcast that I don't have.
Kind of surreal and kind of creepy in a way, but also really normal. And if you know that you're pregnant, it's exciting. But there's also this feeling of, it's not necessarily a negative way of a parasite, but it literally does take all of your energy and nutrients towards in the beginning and then towards the end. And that's hard to give up your body for somebody else. And that's the start of it. I'm still giving my body to somebody else. And
probably over 2 years later now.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, and I'm in a much better place now with my own relationship with my body and becoming a mom and going through pregnancy and birth. Like I really don't care anymore. I know what's more important now, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It's not about how you look, but how you feel and the relationship that you have with your child and the whole family. There's just so many more things that are important than worrying about what you look like. And yeah. This is hard, Jordan. This is hard.
You're doing great.
So
Was your third trimester challenging?
it was towards the end. I was very uncomfortable. I couldn't keep up with the walking, this expectation of exercising. I wasn't doing rigorous exercise, but it was important to me to get outside on a walk, you know, once a day for like an hour and just be out in the sun and move my body because I felt better on the days that I did. And I could sleep better too at night. And towards the end, I ended up getting high blood pressure readings. And the first one that I got was probably 4 weeks before Ruby was due.
It was 4 weeks before your due date?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was born 2 days before the due date. So in terms of the timing of the pregnancy, I feel pretty grateful that she was in there for a good chunk of time. Yeah, so I think it's important to talk about choosing a birthing center and why I did that. My mom gave birth at home for my siblings and I. And so I grew up with this idea that that's something that I'm supposed to do and I should be able to give birth at home if my mom did. And I remember when my little brother was born, I was 8 and I knew that it was sort of odd for her to do that. And she also didn't have a traditional midwife come, but she had an Amish midwife come and going off.
That's part of your story.
Yeah.
If you want, we can go back to the high blood pressure.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious, like, what that was like for you. You know, you still have 4 weeks to go, you know, hopefully until your due date. And then you started to show signs of high blood pressure. What went through your head?
I was really frustrated and in denial. And I thought that I'm getting those readings because I'm in a different context than in my safe home environment. Even though it's a birthing center, there's people with devices and like I don't know my team that well, you know, which is also part of the issue. The midwives that we had, there were 2 of them, and depending on the week, you would meet with a different one. And so depending on who was on call during the birth, that person would show up. And so I felt like it never really became a super trusting relationship or a safe relationship. I had a stronger connection with one of them and not so much the other one. And I should have followed that, you know, intuition because that ended up not being very helpful in the end, you know?
That's really hard. I mean, I feel like that it kind of followed the theme of like not having that control, but it's like deeper than that because I mean, we talk all the time on the podcast about how having like a trusted team is huge for, you know, like continuity of care.
Yeah.
But it's also like you were it sounds like you were going with the birth center for a certain reason and maybe you're holding on to that, like trying to get what you wanted out of like being at a birth center. So it was like, well, this is just part of that.
Yeah, I think I ultimately didn't trust myself enough to give birth at home. And, you know, I always had that fear of what if something would happen at home and how could I live with myself for being the one who made that decision, you know? And I thought, okay, I'm going to compromise here. I'm going to go choose a birthing center because that's at least somewhere in the middle where it's close enough to a hospital and there's also a team there that has more tools maybe than somebody would have in a home setting. And I also liked the idea of being outside of my home. I had this weird thought that like my cats would puncture the birthing tub if you set it up. And like, I didn't want that to happen or to have to clean up the water somehow, but then I wouldn't be the one cleaning it up anyways.
No, definitely not. But
it's just weird thoughts that you have
attached to things, you know?
Yeah. And also the insurance that we were on at the time didn't cover midwives who would come into the home. And so I was sort of forced to choose a a birthing center. That was
to have midwife care
to have
out
that,
of a hospital.
Yes, yeah, which I wanted. I did not want to give birth in a hospital. I knew too much. I knew too much about the whole business of birth and cascade of interventions, and have heard so many horror stories. And I also have trauma, like medical trauma, not myself, but watching my dad go through cancer in that type of environment. And I just don't want to be there, and going through the doula training, I learned, I remember I had the foresight to get connected with a perinatal therapist before all of the blood pressure stuff started happening and before Ruby was born. And I remember telling her, and I wonder what she thought at the time, but I was like, yeah, birth is just like any other function, it's just your body's going to know what to do. And I really believed that. And yeah, things can happen, like I was really let down by my body and the whole situation that I was in. It wasn't just a normal function, there was this stupid blood pressure that was doing its own thing. And sometimes I wonder if I gave myself high blood pressure from having actually a really deep fear about giving birth that I didn't want to admit to myself. And I find comfort in being the expert on things. So if I know everything there is to know about being a doula and a perinatal therapist and the conditions to make somebody feel safe at home, like candle, the light, all these things, then my body and I will work together and we can do this. But that didn't really work. I was truly, really, really scared to go through that. And I think I just tried to pretend that I wasn't.
I mean, I would imagine that's so common because it's sort of like how it's such a scary thing, the unknown, and then childbirth, like, oh, it's so painful. And then you had so much more information. And it's almost like either you fake it till you make it, or I don't know. It's like it makes total sense to me going into it that way of sort of like having to say to yourself, like, I believe this, this, and this to get myself through it, when like deep down that might not be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's just, over planning, over preparing will not actually help me be present in the moment and will not get rid of that fear. What maybe perhaps I could have done, or what I will do with the next one, is do the opposite, like with
practice letting go,
or just accepting that I'm really scared to do this. And with how this birth turned out, I did go through many of my worst fears, having a C-section and being in the hospital setting, which I'll get into. And I survived that. And now I know from experience a little bit more about what one birth could look like. And it's like with many things in life, when you practice something, when you've done it for the first time or second or third, then maybe you can go into the next one a little easier, or maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm still not ready.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, you saw what didn't work for you, and you can like sort of set that aside and like try a different approach.
Yeah.
And that could be huge.
Yeah. It's not about what goes into your hospital bag. It's about the person that's there to help you, that's going to be there no matter what environment you get transferred to. And that I thought that they would be there with me, and I felt abandoned by them. They abandoned me. We were under the impression that they would come with us.
Your care team, your midwife.
Yeah, from that we selected at the birthing center. Because our whole plan was to, have a water birth, just, this very ideal, beautiful, not painless necessarily, but like just this embodied experience of, I'm going to deliver this baby in the water and catch my baby, and Johnny's going to be right there, and it's going to, just all of the things that you want are going to happen somehow. And even though we went through the transfer of care possibility, it went in one ear and out the other. I didn't actually think that was going to happen, because I'm otherwise pretty healthy. I've been walking during this pregnancy. My mom has done this 3 times, no problems. My grandma even, which she's been on as well. I remember growing up and she would say, I gave birth and then wanted to do it again right away. And so I've been hearing these stories from my maternal lineage of like how capable they are and how excited they are to do this and how they do it again right away. And I was scared. I was just so scared and I couldn't admit it to myself. Anyway, yeah, the end of the 3rd trimester, I remember like crying a lot and was really frustrated about the high blood pressure. I thought that it was due to white coat syndrome, which is blood pressure readings that are higher than normal if you're in a setting where you're not comfortable or, yeah, it just elevates your blood pressure. But it was more significant than what white coat syndrome would give on the readings. And so I was told to get a blood pressure monitor at home, which was not a good idea. I mean, it's good to have that, but of course I want to be the expert on that again. And so I'm like tracking this and just hyping myself up, and probably raising it even more. But
well, that's hard, like you can't just sort of like focus on getting through the last few weeks. It's like now you've got this medical thing to focus on.
Yeah. Now I'm like in this sort of, you're heading towards a high risk category. And I remember around month 7 of pregnancy, I was finishing up the practical hours for the doula training. And so I was a doula for a family who the birther had preeclampsia and HELP syndrome. And I just remember hearing her story and I was like, this is never going to happen to me. This is horrible. Like, I can't believe that this happens to anybody, like that you went through this. And it was so hard for her and she was really disconnected to her baby. And I was trying to support her going through that. And it was interesting that then I went through some of that too. And there was just such a strong disconnect between hearing things that happen to other people. And I just put up this wall of like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I remember you talking about that. And I don't remember everything, but I remember you bringing up that you're going to provide doula support. And then afterwards, you didn't want to talk about what happened. It seemed like you were like, it was scary and I think I can't even go there to talk about it because it's coming up so soon for me.
Yeah.
So I feel like it was even clear, like from the outside, that you just had to like close that away in a box.
Yeah. And my first birth that I ever was helping was at month 8. So I was
Maybe
8 months.
Was that?
It was that.
Okay.
I was 8 months pregnant. I was a birth doula for my neighbor and that took place in a hospital. And I remember feeling so astounded by like everything that I had learned in the doula training about what happens in hospital settings happened, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so glad I'm at a birthing center, but the person I was doulaing for like didn't seem to be bothered by any of that stuff. But every time something happened to her body that they didn't ask her for consent for, I was like, check. Oh, and this is how it happens. And then they're going to induce her by, breaking her waters with the whole thing is happening.
It was just like solidifying all of your fears about hospitals.
Yeah.
We don't have to include this necessarily, but I've been wondering if like the particular doula course we took affected that, because
I think so.
Because it was so like, they feel so radical about confronting head on like the problems in like the hospital realm of birth, which I think is great and important, but it goes pretty far. It's like, these things are happening. It's bad, 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 bad. We have to fix this. Like, we have to stand up for people. So I would,
even in the test at the end, they have those open-ended questions, the exam questions, like, this is a situation where your client is being harmed in this way. What are you going to do? How are you going to advocate for your client? And it was listening to that like at month 7, 8, 9 even of pregnancy.
Yeah.
And here I thought it was going to really help me, be prepared, but
it's just highlighting all the
things that could go wrong, which made me look out for them then and see them much more clearly and want certain things to happen, like delayed cord clamping and being able to hold my baby and not aggressively wipe down any of the I don't even know what it's called. Vernix.
Vernix,
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted the birthing center because I knew that I would have a lot more choice and autonomy there.
Thought you did.
I
Thought you would.
that I would. Yeah. So where are we at the story? So
I think the last like 4 weeks with the blood pressure situation.
Yeah, so I'll just say on the 10th of December, so this was a Friday, I went to a friend's house just to keep my mind off of things and distract myself because I was so uncomfortable and just crying all the time. And then I'd be happy and excited. And I had also closed with a lot of my clients. And so I had nothing to do. And so I was trying to keep busy because when I have nothing to do, my mind, starts to get anxious. So I went.
You're still blocking yourself from going there.
I'm not allowing myself to sit with how scared I am and how this event is really right around the corner. I can't learn anything more to make my feelings go away. It is approaching.
I'm so curious, like what that would have looked like if you let yourself go there emotionally. But
I would have needed to be held, I think, by what I really longed for was my mom. She died when I was young. And so I didn't feel like I had this nurturing maternal presence that I craved for in my mom to say, I'm here. Yeah, you can do this. Or even if you're scared, I'm here. I didn't have that. I wanted that. And I thought that the birthing center could provide that touch that I needed. And there's only so much support that you can get from your partner. Like he was so supportive, right? And did the most that he could, but it was really from your mom, your own mom that I wanted.
that's like a special type of nurturing.
Yeah. All you want is your mom, and to be nurtured by your mom. And something that's come up a lot is as you learn to be a parent, you want to go to your parent for comfort. And am I doing this right? Or like, help, this is so hard, Yeah. So there's that grief and loss there. But so I went to a friend's house and I remember showing her this little rash that started to develop on my left arm, kind of by my thumb. And I was like, do you think this is a bug bite? It's so weird. She's like, I don't know. And it itched and it started to spread as I itched it. But I just tried to ignore it and just rolled the sleeve down and didn't want to think about it. Had a nice time, went home. It started to spread a little bit more. And then I told Johnny about it and we immediately go to Dr. Google, which is also a terrible mistake. Do not doom scroll. Do not go self-diagnose on the internet when something happens. So we started researching, like, what could this rash be, around, is it a pregnancy rash? Is it stress? What is it? Is it a bug bite? So we found... Let me look up the name of it. I know the acronym. Okay, so the letters PUPPP stand for pruritic urticarial papules and plaques of pregnancy. Whoa. I have no idea how to pronounce that. But the pup rash is something that can happen when you're in pregnancy or around birth and postpartum. No one really knows why it happens. It can be like an allergic reaction that your body goes through because there's such a cocktail of hormones flowing through your body. And then, if you go through a medical induction, there's even more artificial products in your body and the C-section. And it's just like your body needs to release things. And so I think that's just this overall symptom of stress that's happening to your body. So that was the pup's rash. And I had that rash for 8 weeks after the birth. It was horrible. But it started the Friday that we went into the hospital. And so later that evening, after we Googled a bit, I remember Johnny went to bed and I stayed up because I couldn't sleep and I was just watching a movie. The rash started to flare up again and I freaked out and started Googling again and remembered that I have to go check my blood pressure. And so I did and wrote down the numbers, the reading that I got.
You remembered when you were stressed out?
Yeah, I was stressed. And then I was like, yeah, let's go take my blood pressure. Of course it's going to be high. I was reading about HELP syndrome again and then preeclampsia and just what that can ultimately lead to, which is a fetal death. And then I just got really freaked out and was like, just so out of control in my body. Like things are happening and I'm cranky and uncomfortable. And so I checked my blood pressure by myself and it ended up being at midnight, 165 over 101, which is pretty high. And Johnny was asleep. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, if I go tell him this, he's going to get really concerned and we're going to need to go do something. Or I could choose not to tell him and just go to sleep. But then I'm putting myself and my baby at risk. And everyone would be extremely mad at me if I did that. And I could never forgive myself. So at the time, I feel like I was very annoyed that I had to do that. And frustrated.
That you had to tell him?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to make the following decisions, which are to then go to the hospital and get lab work done because the birthing center is closed at midnight. And the midwife said, yeah, go get some lab work done. You're not going to the hospital to have your baby, but go get the lab work done. And now looking back, I feel like that was an extremely brave thing to do. Like just deciding to do something that I didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm. It's a parenting choice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also for yourself, but.
Yeah. And I said to Johnny after the midwife told us to go, okay, this is it. Like, we're going to be stuck there and we're not going to be able to come back. If as soon as we set foot into those doors, we are going to be prisoners of the hospital system. I just knew.
Wow. I didn't know that you went into it thinking that.
Yeah. It was a very tense car ride to the hospital. I remember. And I journaled this too a couple days after the birth that I packed up all the hospital bags myself. Like I had packed them before, but I started carrying all 3 bags to the door. And Johnny was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you? But I was just in go mode, going to get the lab work done and come home as fast as possible and just bring the bags just in case. So we go and we walk into the hospital and people at the front desk, they're like, oh, are you in labor? And I'm like, no, I'm just here to get lab work done. And there was an anger in my voice.
I wouldn't choose the hospital to be in labor. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Don't you know my birth plan? So they send me upstairs to this triage room and I didn't even want to lay in the bed. They told me, oh, you can lay here, put this little suit on. I'm like, no, I'm keeping my pajamas on. I'm going to sit here and wait until I'll just take my sweater off. You can come draw my blood. Like, there is no reason I need to sit in this bed. I'm not a patient. I'm here to get labs done. Mm-hmm. And it was 1 a.m. at this time. And so then they come and do a COVID test. Or they put that swab all the way in the back of your nose. And I don't like anybody doing invasive stuff like that to me. So, if I'm scared about a COVID test going into the back of my nose, I'm scared of giving birth, Mm-hmm. I don't like things happening to my body that I'm not in control over. So then they want to hook me up to an IV. And I'm like, why? I'm just here to get my urine drawn, to pee in a cup and to get my blood drawn. Why do you need to hook me up to an IV? And they say it's protocol. We just put this in as soon as you enter and exit, you have that in the whole time in case anything happens to you. Mm-hmm. And I found that really odd. Why can't you just wait until there is an emergency to put it in? Because then it's too late or whatever. But it's uncomfortable. They couldn't find the vein, so they had to stab me a few times. And then I ended up almost fainting because of just how overwhelmed and scared I was in that moment. It was just too many things happening too fast. And I was right there in the environment that I so very much did not want to be in. And then several nurses had to tell me, yeah, your blood pressure is really, really high. You need to stay here now. You're going to give birth here. And then I was like, no, I'm going to call the midwife here of our team and get a second opinion. And actually what you're saying, I don't actually believe it because this system, I don't believe because you harm people. That's what my narrative is. And don't care about people. Which is not true, of course. I don't think that particular nurse wanted to harm me, you know, in the moment.
I'm imagining how you're feeling in that situation and like wondering like what's more true. Like, are you like holding on so tightly to what you decided was going to be your plan? And were you like just putting up like a barricade to all of this like hospital stuff?
Both.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah.
And it's like all of the information that you said was too much. It's just telling you, don't trust this, look out for like every problem and push back.
Yeah.
And it sounds like
every single thing I was taught to push back against from that training.
And but even taking that out, and I think the reason why I was sort of asking like which one of those things it was, and it was both, but taking out all the knowledge you had, like I feel like you still would be like holding on. Like I'm just literally like picturing this, like you like reaching back and like holding on to like what you were wanting, and it's almost like the hospital was like swallowing you up.
Yeah. I felt
and it's
completely swallowed up. Yeah. I felt my autonomy and independence and choice. Everything was very quickly being stripped away from me and from Johnny at the same time too. And the midwife then, we called her and she was like, yeah, you should probably just follow what they want to do now. Yeah, those numbers are pretty high. Yeah, I recommend staying. And I was like, how could you not even advocate for me here? Like, what? I thought your birthing philosophy was, you know, keeping me in the, can I still do it there? Like, yeah, I have high blood pressure, but the baby's okay from the monitor that they had put up. Why can't I just come back? I didn't understand and felt really let down and abandoned. So I didn't want to talk to them anymore because they didn't end up showing up at all. They didn't come to the hospital in the 6 days that we were there, you know. And that's a bigger coping tool that I do. If somebody hurts me, I cut them out and don't give them a chance to repair. And I'm working on that. You know, it's not very functional, but it's a way of protecting myself for further harm.
Do you think that would have changed how they acted in the situation? Like, do you think they would have, like you were saying, like you cut them out. Let's say you like didn't give them the opportunity to repair. Do you think they would have showed up if you didn't like stop talking to them?
I remember then, because that was the midwife that I didn't really connect with very much, who was on call that night. And then when the midwife, who I did like a lot, came back on her shift, she reached out. And she was the one who ended up coming to visit our home after Ruby was born and to do all of my following checkups. And I think I wanted to send a message that I was angry to the one that didn't show up because she was on call and she was supposed to, from what I had asked her during my prenatal appointments, okay, so if I do transfer somewhere, are you going to be there? And my impression and feeling was yes. And maybe I didn't understand something correctly, but later I actually ended up finding her on Instagram and saw that a day before, or a day right around when I was admitted to the hospital, something life-threatening happened to her child, which she couldn't disclose to me, of course, because that would not be professional, but it would also be human, and I would have understood and not felt like you just didn't care to be there. But you're going through something on your own. You can't show up for a client. But it's still a mystery why, I don't know, that's one part that was really hard for me.
Yeah. Well, it's like you didn't have your mom. And so that nurturing, you know, needs to come from your team.
Yeah.
And like it was kind of like a one or the other midwife situation. And then when you were feeling like at your lowest and you were like, I just need to talk to my midwife and they will fix this. Like not necessarily that they would, but that's sort of what you were like, you were reaching out for support in like a very important moment. And then you didn't get what you needed.
Yeah. Or at least show up. Even if I can't leave, like show up with yourself, your body.
Yeah.
Even just holding my hand or like, yeah, this is hard. Yeah, I'm here with you in this transfer of care. Like in a way, like it is necessary, you know. I would have trusted that if they came, but it was all over the phone. And then I just gave the phone to Johnny and I couldn't even answer like family. And it was just,
that's devastating.
Felt defeated. Yeah.
And abandoned.
Another important thing that's really frustrating, I feel like I'm giving way too many details, but How are you doing?
Good.
Okay.
You doing okay?
Yeah, I'm good. So the urine test that came back to show if there was protein in the urine, which would indicate preeclampsia, came back with a number that they had actually rounded up to fit the criteria. And Johnny and I were outraged at how can you round up a number just to fit me into this? Like if you hadn't rounded up, it wouldn't have been an issue, the protein. It wouldn't have been the number to cut off to put me into this high risk category. But that's just what their protocol is. There's so many protocols and procedures, and it's not human. It's like, oh, if you get this number, you round it up and boom, you're here. And so we had requested, please do all of this lab work again, because I'm not going to have a C-section or a birth here. You know, I tried to delay as best as I could, knowing that I'd have to be in that hospital environment, but trying to take any agency that I could. Like, we're on our own now. Like, we have to make informed decisions. I'm my doula, you know?
Yeah.
So that was,
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So we got admitted, we left the triage room, and we went to what would be our laboring room. And once I got there, that's where you and Sasha came to visit. So you remember that room and what it looked like. Well, you came to both rooms. They had a tub in there. And once I got into that room and sort of calmed down a bit and kept the lights off and had a moment with Johnny, we grieved a little bit together and we were like, okay, I guess we're here. We're going to wait for these new labs. I guess I'm laboring here. We have some of the tools here that we wanted to bring to the birthing center, such as like the little fairy lights and music and various tools that, you know, to relieve pressure. And I had asked, can I labor in the tub? So, okay, I could still I can't give birth in the tub. They didn't allow me to do that, which I thought was ridiculous. Like, you're not allowed to give birth in this room in a certain way that you would want.
I think it has to do with like
space in the bathroom.
Is it? I thought it had to do with like you can't birth in a tub that like has a drain. Like it has to be like an enclosed.
I have no idea.
I don't know. But I remember you telling us when we came to bring things, like we brought you the twinkle lights, maybe extra twinkle lights or something.
You brought little candles that could turn on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying like, yeah, I have high blood pressure, but it's just because I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, I was totally in denial. Yeah.
Which, I mean, that does happen.
What did you think when I said that?
I believed that was impacting you a lot. I didn't think like, oh, she's wrong. You know, like I didn't have enough information to make a judgment. I remember that you were like walking around barefoot and I felt like your feet looked a little bit swollen. And part of me was like, is that related to her blood pressure or is that just, you know, that happens at the end of pregnancy anyway?
Yeah. That's also important to mention. During the third trimester and probably in the middle of the second trimester, I could hardly make fists with my hands.
Oh, interesting.
And I would swell up in my feet and my hands. And I almost had like carpal tunnel symptoms where I couldn't do cat-cow anymore. It just hurt so much. That's a position where you like roll your back. You're on your hands and your knees. I couldn't be in that position. And when I'd sleep, it would hurt so much because my hands would tense up and I'd wake up and it would just be, and that was a symptom of preeclampsia. I just chalked it up to, I'm pregnant.
Yeah. And that does cause things like that. But yeah, it's hard, especially when you're just like very, you know, strongly avoiding.
I'm also very stubborn.
Yes.
So, yeah. Didn't help.
So you made it into where you assumed you would ultimately give birth.
Yeah.
And you're processing a little bit. Have you sort of like allowed in this new reality at this point? And you're sort of like, okay, how can we make this new reality work to like resemble as closely to what I wanted in the beginning as possible?
Yeah. Even though I'm also a very resourceful person because I've had to be due to things that have happened in my life where I had to have independence pretty young. When I'm in a situation, I'm pretty capable of like figuring things out. So I took everything out of the bag, set things up, put the candles that you had brought. I started to like delegate and like figure things out. You know, I'm in crisis essentially. I'm good at that.
And you haven't previously thought through this situation yet. So you got to like retake control.
Yeah. And I'm good at that, right? Like, okay, we're going to do this. So I felt good, had a newfound sense of, even though I didn't want to be there, I knew that I had accepted that we were there and probably channeled my emotions into setting up the space. There's that aesthetic perfectionism again, you know. I remember I had set up this little altar on my meal tray that comes over your bed of a candle and like a picture of my mom and the beads that I had from the little celebration that I had to celebrate like my initiation into motherhood, and everyone brought a little bead. So I had like my, you know, just this energy. I set up this altar, and it's like the altar didn't do anything. It was just there as a comfort. But, you know, I
mean, rituals. We were just talking about how important small rituals are when we talked to Libby.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think that was probably a bigger comfort to you than you realized.
Yeah.
It's like a little piece of the people that are important to you. And that's what you intended it to be.
Yeah. And they are important. And now I'm on the other side of things. It's like, no matter what I do to fiddle around with my environment, like that's not going to help me at the end of the day. It's this internal sense of trust and strength and the ability to let things go and just decipher where you need to put your energy in a way.
Do you think it's like a further distraction from that for you to focus on those things?
It's just distracting. Yeah. Fiddling
I
around. Anyway, so set things up, and then Johnny went to go home around 6 a.m. to go feed the cats. And I think I texted the two of you that you're on cat duty now. We asked you if you could be, and then now it was like really on cat duty, which you found out later. But, you know, we thought we would give birth at the birthing center and like go home in 24 hours, you know, and it would just be like a 2-day thing, but it ended up being almost a week.
Yeah, it didn't even seem like it though. I had a question. What was it? Okay, so it's 6 a.m. and that is, you went around midnight, and so now it's around 6 hours later.
It's December 11th.
Okay.
6 a.m. Yeah. Okay. Johnny goes home. I text you guys. I don't text anybody else. Because I'm not giving birth there still. I'm like not even letting the rest of the world know where I am. If nobody knows, I'm not there. And then I slept for like an hour, which was like the last time that I actually slept during the whole 6 days that I was there. And then Johnny comes back to the hospital with a few more things. We get a little more comfortable. And then they bring back the lab work again. And they're like, these numbers just keep elevating. Okay, now it's not just rounding up. It's actually in this category. And I'm like, gosh, okay, I guess my body, I'm here. Let's do this. So then they want to give me, which I can never pronounce this, even when guests come on.
Misoprostol?
Misoprostol. They give me misoprostol. And I think we took it around maybe noon, and then we just sort of hung out and just chilled. Maybe I napped again, maybe? I'm not sure. I don't even remember what happened.
I have a question, not to backtrack too much, but what was it like for you to get those new readings of, no, actually, we're not rounding up, like this is really happening? Did it make you feel more alarmed, or was it just like, okay, I don't have to fight against this anymore, like almost a relief?
I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that I had preeclampsia until weeks after I had Ruby and was home. Yeah. There's still a part of me that thinks I gave myself high blood pressure, and like I couldn't possibly be somebody who had something like this. Like it's such a denial part. Yeah. I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I cannot accept that my body wasn't working with me or failed me. But then at the same time, I can accept being scared and really uncomfortable and having fear in that environment. So that raises your blood pressure. But then, I don't know.
Do you think it's like has to do with your mom and your grandma could do it without having these problems, so why would that happen to me?
Probably, yeah. I mean, they don't know what causes preeclampsia, So it's a mystery, and it's frustrating. It's beyond frustrating, because as somebody who likes to know the answer to things, I can't figure that out. And it scares me going into the next pregnancy, because what if it happens again? I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how to avoid it.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I mean, I haven't given birth, but like I have health conditions where they're just like, you have this? We don't know why you have it. We don't know how to treat it. Good luck. And it's just like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so isolating and confusing. And
it's just like so many things that women struggle with because there's just not enough research, and
it's just
it's
this
infuriating.
out of body experience. Like you can't accept the mind and the body are just not connected in that moment. Mm-hmm. I can accept that somebody else would have that, but not myself. I don't. Maybe it's an arrogance or so. I don't know. But anyway, so then that was probably the best part in the hospital, where we're just sort of waiting, and they wanted to start me on Pitocin. I said no. Let's take this misoprostol, and I'm going to wait for things to happen. We don't need to give me everything at once. We can try one thing at a time. And they suggested the Foley balloon. I didn't want to do that. I said, I want to wait for my water to break on its own. And that was one thing that did happen with the aid of that artificial, cervix opener. But that was a really cool experience. We went to sleep, and I remember wanting to sleep next to Johnny and not wanting to sleep in that bed. It was just so uncomfortable, and the sheets are plastic, and it's just awful. And you're like in the middle of the room right next to all this scary equipment, and you just feel like you're on the spot. And I'm just in denial that I'm a patient. So I want to be a normal person. I was envious that Johnny could sleep on that little side bed. Mm-hmm. I also didn't know this at the time, but we were put in a special room. Not a normal delivery room. It was a high risk room.
Oh,
so there's
bigger.
More
stuff.
The bathroom was bigger too, but I didn't know that at the time. And so that whole first day, they're coming in, checking. I have the monitor on my belly, which is terribly uncomfortable. Every time you move, they just come in the frenzy, like trying to check it.
They have to like make sure it's all getting the baby's heart rate at all times.
Yeah, and you have the IV in, and it's just so uncomfortable. And then I asked them if I could take the mattress off of the bed and put it next to Johnny, and they were like, no, you can't do that. Why? Why can't I take this mattress off? Like, what is it to you? But then I just they had like a pad where you can labor on, and it's just this thin pad. And I took the blanket, my blanket that I brought from home, and I went onto that, and I slept next to Johnny. And I just felt like so good about that, because here I am sleeping how I want. It's just so like pathetic.
Being not the patient.
Yeah. And I could look over and see the bed in the corner with all the lights on it and know that I'm not there. I'm taking charge of my own comfort and needs. And so I'm still uncomfortable because I'm pregnant. When I can't really sleep flat on the ground, you need more pillows. So it's like this big blob. And I think at like 4 a.m., I have this sensation of this popping feeling and then a gush of water. And I was like, oh, something's happening. I felt so excited. And I stood up and I got into this position where I'm like on my knees. And it's like, that's the imagery that I had of like how I would give birth. I'm in my own body. There's nobody there. These things are happening that I'm excited about and I'm intrigued by it. And so the water like continues to come out and I'm just like, yeah, cool. It's happening. And Johnny's like freaking out like, oh my God, what? And then I remember the smell was kind of weird, just sort of earthy, and then everything is drenched. The bed that I had made. So much water came out.
Wow.
And a little bit of blood. But I was excited. I took my pants off. I was like naked, didn't even care about these strangers. I was just like, yes, this is happening. It's go time.
Stay tuned for part 2 coming out on November 20th.
Bearing Birth is available on all major podcast streaming services. We invite you to subscribe as well as follow us on Instagram at Bearing Birth Podcast.